The rain hadn't stopped for days. It wasn't just a drizzle or the kind of storm that passed through overnight. It was relentless, a constant hammering against the rooftops, flooding the streets, soaking deep into the earth. The sky was a permanent shade of gray, heavy and unyielding, pressing down on the small town like a warning no one could quite understand. Lena sat in the passenger seat, staring through the windshield, watching as the wipers struggled against the downpour. The car's headlights barely cut through the fog clinging to the narrow road. She had never been out this far before. The houses had become fewer, the trees taller, the roads rougher. Felt like driving into a place forgotten by time. "Are you sure this is the right address?" she asked, glancing at Mark, who gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. "Yeah," he said, though he didn't sound sure at all. "It should be just up ahead." Lena checked her phone again. No signal. Course. She had read about this place before, in an old forum post buried deep in the internet. People called it the sinking house. A house that didn't just settle into the ground like any other. This one was being swallowed. Mark had laughed when she told him about it, calling it a cheap urban legend. But there had been something in the way he kept asking about it afterward. Something in the way he finally gave in when she suggested they check it out. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was something else. The road twisted sharply, and the tires skidded slightly in the mud. Mark muttered a curse under his breath as the headlights caught a shape in the distance. The house. It looked almost normal at first glance. A simple two-story house, paint peeling at the edges, the front porch sagging. But then Lena noticed the way the foundation didn't sit right, the way the earth around it seemed wrong. As if something underneath had been shifting, pulling it down inch by inch. Mark pulled the car to a stop. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain drummed against the roof, the only sound in the eerie quiet of the night. "Looks abandoned," Mark said. Lena exhaled slowly. "Yeah. Let's check it out." They stepped out of the car, their shoes sinking slightly into the wet ground. The air smelled heavy like damp wood and something else, something stale, almost rotten. Lena pulled her jacket tighter around her as they made their way to the porch. Each step on the old wooden planks creaked under their weight. Mark reached for the door handle, testing it. It was unlocked. The door swung open with a groan, revealing the darkness inside. The air that rushed out was thick with dust and something colder than the night outside. Lena felt a chill crawl up her spine, but she stepped forward anyway, flicking on her flashlight. The inside was worse than she expected. The walls were covered in water stains, the floors warped, the wallpaper peeling in long, curling strips. But it wasn't just the state of decay that unsettled her. It was the feeling. The silence wasn't the kind that came with an empty house. Felt occupied. Mark moved ahead, his own flashlight beam sweeping across the ruined furniture and broken glass scattered across the floor. "Doesn't look like anyone's been here in years," he said, voice quieter than before. Lena nodded, but something was bothering her. The walls, they seemed to be shifting ever so slightly, as if breathing. She blinked, shaking off the thought. Just water damage. Just the way the shadows played tricks. Then came the sound. A deep, low groan, like wood straining under an unbearable weight. Mark froze, his flashlight trembling slightly in his grip. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Lena nodded, throat dry. The sound came again, longer this time, deeper. And then something else, something unmistakable. A slow, dragging movement like something shifting in the walls. The house was sinking. And they were inside it. Lena's breath hitched as the sound echoed through the rotting walls. It wasn't just the creaking of an old house settling. It was deeper, almost alive, like something shifting just beneath the surface. She turned to Mark, whose expression had hardened. His flashlight beam trembled as it swept across the warped floorboards, illuminating dust motes swirling in the stale air. "That wasn't the wind," Lena murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark shook his head. "No, it wasn't." For a long moment they stood in silence, listening. The rain outside had softened into a steady drizzle, tapping lightly against the shattered windows. The house, though, felt impossibly still. Too still. Mark took a slow step forward, and the floor groaned under his weight. Lena winced, glancing down, suddenly hyper-aware of how uneven the ground felt. It was as if the house wasn't resting on solid foundation but something looser, something unstable. She swallowed. "Let's be quick, okay? Just look around and then we leave." Mark nodded, though he didn't look convinced. He lifted his phone, snapping a few photos of the ruined interior. The camera flash revealed waterlogged furniture, a broken staircase leading to the second floor, and doorways leading deeper into the house. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, twisting at the edges of the light before disappearing into the darkness. Lena shivered. Something about this place didn't feel right. It wasn't just abandoned, it was wrong. She turned her flashlight toward a small, dusty table near the entrance. A stack of old newspapers sat atop it, their edges curled with moisture. Carefully, she lifted the top one. The date was nearly 20 years old. The headline read, "Family missing from rural home. House condemned after mysterious incident." Lena's fingers tightened around the paper. She skimmed the article, her eyes darting over the words. A local family, mother, father, 2 children, had disappeared without a trace. No signs of forced entry. No struggle. Just gone. Their house, this house, was deemed unsafe soon after. The ground beneath it had begun to shift, as if the earth itself was pulling it down. No one had lived here since. "Mark," she called, her voice low. "You need to see this." He stepped closer, glancing over her shoulder. His brows furrowed. "Missing family." Lena nodded. "And the house was supposed to be condemned." Mark exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "Then why is it still standing?" Before Lena could respond, another sound came from deep within the house. Not wood creaking this time. Not the rain. It was a slow, dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. Lena's stomach tightened. That came from the hallway. Mark adjusted his grip on his flashlight. Could be an animal. Maybe raccoons or something. Lena stared at him. "You really believe that?" Mark hesitated, then shook his head. "No." Still, he took a cautious step forward, shining his flashlight into the hallway. Lena followed, her heartbeat loud in her ears. The further they moved from the entrance, the colder the air became. A damp, musty smell clung to the walls, thick and suffocating. The hallway was lined with doors, most of them slightly ajar. The peeling wallpaper was marked with deep stains, as if water had seeped in for years. The floor felt uneven beneath their feet, like it could give way at any moment. Then something caught Lena's eye. At the very end of the hall, past the broken picture frames and decayed wood, there was a single door that was completely intact. No peeling paint, no water damage, just untouched. Lena stopped. "Mark, that door." He followed her gaze and frowned. "Yeah, weird." She took a step closer, but the second her foot landed on the floorboard, a deep groan rumbled beneath them. Not from the house. No, this sound came from below. Lena stumbled back. "Something's under us." Mark swept his flashlight downward, but there was nothing there. Just rotting floorboards and damp wood. But Lena knew she hadn't imagined it. That sound wasn't normal. A sudden bang echoed through the house. Lena and Mark spun around, flashlights shaking as they searched for the source. The noise had come from behind them, back toward the front of the house. The front door. "Someone's here," Mark whispered. Lena's pulse pounded. They had been alone when they entered. No other cars outside. No footprints in the mud. So who or what had just shut the door? A cold draft brushed against Lena's skin, sending goosebumps up her arms. The house was closing in on them. Then, from the hallway ahead, the untouched door creaked open. Just an inch. Just enough for the darkness inside to peer out at them. Lena's breath caught in her throat. Something moved inside that room. Something slow. And then the dragging sound started again. Only this time it was getting closer. The dragging sound sent a chill through Lena's body, and her muscles locked in place. The door at the end of the hall was still slightly open, a sliver of darkness pressing against the dim light of their flashlights. Mark took an unconscious step backward, his breathing shallow. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them dared. The sound continued, slow, deliberate, like something impossibly heavy was being pulled across the floor. The air in the hallway had thickened, heavy with dampness and something else Lena couldn't place. It wasn't just the smell of rot. It was older, more bitter. Mark's hand twitched at his side. Then suddenly he reached out and grabbed her wrist. "We're leaving," he whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. Lena wanted to agree. She wanted to turn around and run back to the front door, to push out into the rain and drive away from this sinking house, away from whatever was in that room. But something about the way the door had opened on its own, the way the sound was coming toward them, made her hesitate. She swallowed, forcing her voice to stay steady. "What if it's—" A sharp knock cut her off. Not from the front door. Not from behind them. From inside the untouched room. 3 solid, deliberate knocks. Mark tensed beside her, and Lena felt his grip on her wrist tighten. No one else was here. They had checked. Mark lifted his flashlight, pointing it toward the narrow gap in the door. Nothing but darkness. Lena's stomach twisted. Everything in her screamed to turn and run, but at the same time she needed to know. She took a small step forward. "Lena," Mark hissed, but she ignored him. She reached out, her fingers trembling as they hovered over the edge of the door. The wood was ice cold. She hesitated for a second longer, then pushed. The door creaked open, revealing a room that shouldn't have been there. It was pristine. The wallpaper wasn't peeling, the floor wasn't warped. A single wooden chair sat in the center, facing an empty fireplace. A clock hung on the far wall, its hands frozen at 3:12. The dragging sound had stopped. Mark stepped in behind her, his flashlight sweeping the room. "This doesn't make sense," he murmured. Lena agreed. It was like stepping into a different time, a preserved piece of the past that the rest of the house had forgotten. And yet something felt horribly wrong. There were no windows, no dust, no signs of decay. It was as if someone had been in here only moments before. Then she noticed something else. The chair in the center of the room. It wasn't empty anymore. Lena's breath caught in her throat. A figure sat there, hunched slightly forward, completely still. Mark saw it at the same time. His flashlight flickered as he stumbled back, bumping into Lena. "What the—" The figure didn't move. It was a man, or at least it looked like one. His skin was pale, stretched too tightly over his bones. His clothes were old-fashioned, stained with something dark. His head was tilted slightly downward, his hands resting in his lap. Lena couldn't move. Her pulse pounded in her ears, but she couldn't look away. The man's chest rose and fell, shallow, slow. He was breathing. Mark's voice came out hoarse. "Sir." The man didn't respond. Mark took an uneasy step forward. "Hey, are you?" The man's head jerked up. Lena barely had time to register his face before every muscle in her body locked up in terror. His eyes were hollow, deep pits of blackness. His mouth hung open, but there was no sound, no breath, nothing. Just that void where his face should have been. And then, slowly, he stood up. Lena gasped and stumbled backward, slamming into the doorframe. Mark was already moving, grabbing her arm and yanking her out of the room. The second they crossed the threshold, the dragging sound started again. Louder this time, faster. Lena didn't look back. She didn't need to. They bolted down the hallway, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The house itself seemed to lurch, the floor beneath them shifting as though it was pulling them deeper inside. Lena's mind was screaming. The front door was in sight. Just a few more steps. Then something grabbed her ankle. She hit the ground hard, her flashlight slipping from her grasp. Her breath whooshed out of her lungs as icy fingers curled around her leg, pulling. Mark shouted her name, but she could barely hear him over the rush of blood in her ears. She kicked wildly, twisting her body, scrambling against the warped wood. The thing's grip was strong, too strong. Then, just as suddenly as it had grabbed her, it let go. Lena didn't waste a second. She scrambled to her feet, Mark already pulling her toward the door. They burst outside, rain hitting them like a slap to the face. Mark didn't stop until they reached the car. He fumbled with the keys, hands shaking, and yanked the door open. Lena collapsed into the passenger seat, her chest heaving. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Mark slammed the car into drive, the tires skidding against the muddy road as they sped away from the house. Only when they were several miles down the road did Lena finally risk a glance in the rearview mirror. The house was still there, sinking into the earth. But the front door, it was wide open, and something was standing in the doorway, watching them leave. The rain hammered against the windshield as Mark gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. The road was slick, the tires struggling for traction as he pushed the car forward, desperate to put as much distance between them and that house as possible. Neither of them spoke. The silence in the car was thick, except for their ragged breathing and the rhythmic swipe of the windshield wipers. Lena sat rigid in the passenger seat, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Her body still felt cold where those fingers had wrapped around her ankle. Her mind kept replaying the image of that figure standing in the doorway, watching, waiting. Mark stole a quick glance at her. "Are you okay?" Lena shook her head. "No," her voice came out flat, hollow. "That thing. The man in the chair." She swallowed hard. "Did you see his face?" Mark hesitated, his grip tightening. "It wasn't a face." Lena shuddered. She knew he was right. Whatever had been in that room wasn't human. At least not anymore. The headlights cut through the misty darkness, illuminating the lonely stretch of road ahead. The forest loomed on either side, trees swaying violently in the wind. Every few moments, Lena caught herself checking the side mirrors, expecting to see something lurking just beyond the reach of the taillights. "We shouldn't have gone in," Mark muttered. Lena exhaled shakily. "I know." A deep, suffocating dread settled in her chest. It wasn't just fear of what they had seen, it was something worse. A feeling she couldn't shake, like they hadn't really left. Like something had followed them. Mark suddenly hit the brakes. The tires screeched as the car skidded, jerking to a stop. Lena gasped, her hands flying to the dashboard. "What?" Mark's breath came in sharp gasps. He stared straight ahead, unmoving. Lena followed his gaze. A figure stood in the middle of the road, illuminated by the headlights. Lena's stomach twisted. The figure was facing away from them. It was tall, unmoving, its shoulders slightly hunched. Water dripped from its clothes, pooling on the asphalt beneath its bare feet. Mark didn't move. He didn't even blink. "No way," he whispered. Lena's pulse pounded in her ears. "Is that?" Then, before she could finish, the figure twitched. Its head snapped to the side, but not all the way, just far enough to be wrong. Unnatural. Lena's breath caught in her throat. "Go," she choked out. Mark didn't hesitate. He slammed his foot on the gas. The engine roared, and the car lurched forward. Just as they were about to reach the figure, it moved. Not like a person. Not like anything human. One moment it was standing there and the next it was gone. Mark swerved violently, the car fishtailing before he managed to regain control. They tore down the road, neither daring to look back. Lena's hands trembled in her lap. That was him. Mark didn't respond. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed ahead, but Lena knew he was thinking the same thing. It wasn't just that they had seen something in the house. Had seen them too. And now it wasn't going to let them go. The air inside the car felt heavy, thick with something Lena couldn't name. The temperature seemed to drop, a damp chill creeping in. She rubbed her arms, her skin prickling. The town wasn't far now. They just had to get somewhere safe, somewhere with lights and people and... Lena stiffened. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. Slowly, her gaze drifted to the side mirror. At first, there was nothing but darkness and the blur of trees rushing past. Then, just for a second, she saw something. Shadow. Shape. Running alongside the car. Lena's throat tightened. Whoa. Not running. Keeping pace. Her breath hitched. The figure was just beyond the reach of the headlights, its form barely visible, moving effortlessly through the trees. Then it turned its head. Two hollow black pits stared back at her. Lena screamed. Mark jerked in alarm. What? She pointed, her voice breaking. It's. And then it was gone. Mark's foot slammed on the gas, and the car shot forward, the trees blurring into a wall of darkness. Lena's chest heaved. It was there. Right next to us. Mark didn't argue. He didn't even ask if she was sure. Because he believed her. Because he had seen it too. The lights of the town finally appeared in the distance, small and scattered, but enough to send a wave of relief crashing over Lena. Civilization. Safety. They sped toward it, desperate to reach the glow of streetlights, the hum of people, anything but the emptiness of that road. But just before they reached the first intersection, just as Lena allowed herself to think they were safe, the radio crackled. A burst of static, loud and jarring. Then beneath it, voice, distorted, faint. Lena's blood ran cold. She couldn't make out the words at first. The voice was warped, broken by the static. But as it grew clearer, her stomach twisted. It was her name, spoken slowly, deliberately. Lena. Her breath stilled. The static grew louder, crackling like a fire in her ears. Let me in. Lena's body went ice cold. Mark slammed his hand against the radio, twisting the dial, but the voice remained. Let me in. The words slithered through the speakers, seeping into her bones. Then suddenly, silence. The radio cut out. Mark's breathing was ragged. His fingers trembled where they gripped the steering wheel. Lena couldn't move. Something had followed them. And it wasn't done yet. Mark gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The radio remained silent now, as if nothing had happened, but the echo of that voice, Lena. Let me in, still rang in the air between them. The town's dim streetlights flickered as they passed beneath them, casting long, distorted shadows over the wet pavement. The relief of being back in civilization should have settled their nerves, but instead, the fear clung to them like a second skin. Lena's hands trembled in her lap. She felt numb, as though her body couldn't process the cold shock running through her veins. She kept stealing glances at the rearview mirror, expecting to see that figure still chasing them, still watching. Mark swallowed hard. We need to go somewhere, anywhere. We can't just sit in the car. Lena barely heard him. Her focus was locked on the window, on the way the rain distorted the outside world. The town felt off. The streets were empty. No pedestrians. No other cars. Just the dim glow of streetlights reflecting on the wet asphalt. Then, she noticed something that made her stomach turn. Town looked the same. But it wasn't. She'd been here hundreds of times before, but now the buildings seemed misplaced. The gas station on the corner. It had always been there, hadn't it? But why did it look older? As if the neon sign hadn't been replaced in decades. And the diner across the street, its windows dark, the open 24 hours sign flickering weakly. Why did it feel abandoned, like no one had stepped inside in years? A lump formed in her throat. Mark, something's wrong. He didn't respond right away. He was staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched, eyes darting from one side of the street to the other. Lena turned to him, her pulse quickening. Mark. He inhaled sharply, his hands shaking. This isn't the same town. The words sent a cold wave of dread washing over her. What do you mean? Mark shook his head, his voice unsteady. I don't know. I know we drove straight here. But look around. This isn't right. Lena's breath hitched as she scanned the street again, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. It wasn't just the buildings. The air itself felt thick, heavy, like they weren't supposed to be here. Then a movement caught her eye. A figure stood under a flickering streetlight. Lena stiffened. The figure's back was turned, just like the one they'd seen on the road. The rain dripped from its silhouette, motionless, waiting. A chill ran down her spine. Mark followed her gaze and cursed under his breath. No way. Slowly, the figure's head began to turn. Lena's breathing stopped. It twisted, but too far beyond what was humanly possible. The head kept turning, rotating until it was facing them completely. Two empty black pits stared back at them. Lena let out a choked gasp. Drive. Now. Mark didn't hesitate. He slammed his foot on the gas, the tires screeching against the wet road. The car sped forward, past the flickering streetlight. And the figure was gone. Mark's hands shook as he gripped the wheel. His breaths shallow and quick. This isn't real. This isn't. Then the headlights flickered. The dashboard lights sputtered. The engine gave a sickening sputter, and the car lurched violently, skidding as if the road itself had shifted beneath them. Lena clutched the seat. What's happening? The car stopped. Not just the engine, everything. The rain outside seemed to freeze midair. The streetlights dimmed, their glow fading into a suffocating darkness. And then, knock, low, coming from the back window. Lena's entire body seized with terror. Mark didn't move. He sat completely still, his breath ragged, staring straight ahead. His grip on the wheel was so tight it looked painful. The knock came again. Lena's hand twitched toward the lock, but she forced herself to stop. She didn't want to look. She couldn't look. Mark exhaled shakily. Don't. Too late. Lena turned her head and came face to face with it. The figure stood right outside the car, its hollow black eyes level with hers. But it wasn't just watching anymore. It was smiling. Lena screamed. The car lights flickered back on. The rain resumed its downpour. The engine roared to life. Mark floored the gas pedal. The tires screeched as they shot forward, the force slamming Lena back into her seat. She was shaking so violently she could barely form words. It was right there. Mark's voice was frantic. I know. The car sped down the road, weaving through the streets, but nothing felt normal. The buildings still seemed wrong, the streets still empty. They were moving, but it didn't feel like they were getting anywhere. Then the radio crackled back to life. That voice. You shouldn't have left. Lena slapped her hands over her ears, shaking her head. No. You brought it with you. Tears burned in her eyes. Stop. Just stop. Mark reached for the dial again, twisting it wildly, but the voice only grew louder. You were never supposed to leave the house. The words sent a shudder through Lena's body. The house. She looked at Mark, her breath coming in sharp gasps. What if we didn't leave? Mark's hands froze. What? Lena's voice trembled. What if we never left? A heavy silence filled the car. The realization settled in, cold and suffocating. They hadn't escaped. They had just brought it with them. And now there was nowhere left to run. The car raced down the endless stretch of road, but no matter how far they drove, the town never seemed to change. The same flickering streetlights, the same abandoned buildings, the same suffocating silence. Mark's hands were trembling on the wheel, his breaths shallow. Lena sat frozen beside him, her body rigid, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. The voice on the radio had gone silent, but the words still echoed in her mind. You were never supposed to leave the house. Lena swallowed hard, her fingers gripping the edges of her seat. Mark, what if we never actually left? Mark's jaw clenched. That's impossible. But was it? Lena's stomach twisted as the thought took hold. The house had felt wrong from the moment they stepped inside. The sinking floor, the rotting walls, the way the shadows seemed to move when they weren't looking. They had run out, gotten in the car, sped away. But what if they never really escaped? What if they were still there? Mark suddenly slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched, and the car skidded to a stop in the middle of the empty road. Lena jerked forward, her seatbelt locking against her chest. "What are you doing?" Mark's breath was ragged. He was staring at the rearview mirror, his face pale as a ghost. "Look." Lena turned slowly. At first, she saw nothing but the empty road stretching behind them. The rain blurred the view, casting a hazy glow under the streetlights. Then her blood ran cold. The house. It stood in the middle of the road, where it shouldn't be, where it couldn't be. Its rotting frame loomed in the darkness, its broken windows staring back at them like hollow eyes. The front door was wide open, revealing nothing but pitch-black emptiness inside. Lena's fingers dug into her arms. "No. No, that's not possible." Mark's voice was barely a whisper. "We never left." The realization hit like a punch to the gut. Everything, the town, the road, the endless loop of empty buildings, it had all been a trick. Trap. They hadn't escaped the house. The house had escaped with them. Lena felt her pulse pound in her ears. "What do we do?" Mark swallowed, his throat tight. "We have to go back." Lena recoiled. "Are you crazy? After everything?" Mark turned to her, his eyes wild but clear. "We're already there, Lena. We never left. If we don't go inside and finish this," he exhaled shakily, "it won't let us go." Lena's breath came in sharp gasps, but she knew he was right. The house was waiting. Slowly, Mark put the car in reverse, the tires crunching over the wet road as they backed toward the looming structure. The closer they got, the heavier the air became, pressing down on them like unseen hands. Lena's chest tightened as they reached the front steps. The door yawned open wider, like a mouth ready to swallow them whole. Mark killed the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. Neither of them moved. Then Lena felt it. Presence. Something was inside the car. She didn't dare turn her head, but she could feel it behind her. A whisper of cold breath against her neck. A weight pressing into the seat. Mark's fingers twitched, gripping the door handle. "On 3, he whispered. Lena nodded, her hands trembling. 1. The presence behind them shifted. 2. The air grew thick, heavy with something unseen. 3. They threw their doors open and ran. The rain pounded against their skin as they bolted up the steps, across the threshold, into the darkness of the house. The moment they crossed inside, the door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang. The house groaned around them, the floor shuddering beneath their feet. The air was damp, thick with a smell of rot and something deeper, something wrong. Lena's eyes darted to the living room. The chair was still there. The figure that had once sat in it was gone. Mark grabbed her hand. "We end this. Now." The walls shuddered. Shadows slithered along the floor, reaching for them. A low, guttural whisper echoed through the house. "You should have stayed." Lena squeezed her eyes shut. "What do we do?" Mark's gaze snapped to the basement door. It was open, a gaping black void waiting. Lena shook her head. "No. No way." Mark pulled her forward. "This is where it started. This is where we finish it." The whispers grew louder. The floor beneath them trembled. The walls seemed to breathe. They moved quickly, descending the creaking stairs, their footsteps echoing in the suffocating dark. The deeper they went, the colder it became, until their breaths turned to mist in the air. At the bottom they saw it. The source. Pit. A black, endless void in the center of the floor, pulsing with something alive. The house wasn't sinking. It was feeding. And it had been waiting for them to return. A figure stood at the edge of the pit. The same figure they had seen on the road. The same one that had followed them. But now it faced them directly. Lena's breath caught in her throat. It was her. A twisted reflection of herself. Eyes hollow, lips curled into a knowing smile. It tilted its head. "You brought me back." Lena stumbled backward, her mind reeling. "No. No, that's not." Mark grabbed her arm. "We have to close it." The walls trembled violently. The pit seemed to breathe, sucking in the air around them. Mark pulled a lighter from his pocket. "Burn it." Lena's eyes widened. "What?" He grabbed an old wooden beam from the floor, lighting the edge. The fire flickered to life, casting wild shadows against the walls. The figure stepped closer, its empty eyes locking onto Lena. "You were always meant to stay." Lena's body shook, but she forced herself to move. She grabbed another piece of wood, lighting it. The flames spread quickly. The house screamed. Not a creak, not a groan, an actual human scream. The figure's smile faltered. Lena met its hollow gaze. "I'm not staying." The fire roared to life, consuming the walls, the pit, the shadows themselves. The house convulsed. The floor buckled. Mark grabbed Lena's hand, pulling her toward the stairs. They ran. The walls crumbled around them. The front door was barely visible through the smoke, but they pushed forward. The moment they crossed the threshold, the world shifted. The house was gone. No burning wreckage. No ruins. Just an empty lot. The rain had stopped. The sky was clear. Lena's chest heaved as she turned to Mark. "Did we?" Mark exhaled. "I think so." A long silence stretched between them. Then, from the distance, a whisper. "You never really left." Lena stood frozen, her breath still coming in ragged gasps. The whisper had been faint, almost too quiet to be real. But it was there. She looked at Mark, her pulse pounding in her ears. His face was pale, his jaw tight. He had heard it too. They were standing in an empty lot now. The house completely gone, as if it had never existed. The sky overhead was clear, the air no longer thick with that heavy, suffocating feeling. It should have been over. But the whisper. Lena turned in slow circles, searching the quiet streets for any sign of movement. Everything looked normal. The town stretched out around them, lifeless but no longer distorted. The road wasn't looping anymore. The buildings stood still, their shadows sharp and unmoving. It all felt real. Mark exhaled, rubbing a shaking hand down his face. "It's over," he said, like he was trying to convince himself as much as her. "We did it." Lena wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe that the house, the pit, the thing that had worn her face, none of it could reach them anymore. But the whisper still lingered in her mind, like an afterimage of something she couldn't quite shake. She swallowed hard. "Let's get out of here." Mark nodded, and they both turned toward the car, still parked exactly where they had left it. The sight of it was almost jarring, something so normal after everything that had just happened. The keys were still in the ignition. The doors were still open from when they had bolted out. It was as if time had barely moved. They climbed in, shutting the doors behind them, the sound oddly final. Mark started the engine, and for a long moment they just sat there, staring ahead. The dashboard clock still read the same time as when they had first arrived. Lena frowned, pointing at it. "Is that right?" Mark followed her gaze, his brows knitting together. "That can't be." The clock wasn't moving. The numbers glowed in the dim interior, frozen. A cold dread curled in Lena's stomach. "Drive." Mark didn't argue. He put the car in gear and pulled away from the empty lot, his hands tight on the wheel. The town passed by in a blur of streetlights and cracked pavement, but neither of them spoke. Lena kept her eyes on the road, watching for anything, anyone out of place. But nothing happened. No flickering lights, no shifting shadows, no impossible turns leading them back to the house. Just the long, empty road stretching ahead. Lena let out a slow breath. Maybe it really was over. They drove in silence for what felt like hours before the familiar sight of the highway finally came into view. The glowing green sign for the next town over felt almost surreal, a reminder that the outside world still existed. Mark merged onto the highway, the hum of the tires on the asphalt steady and grounding. Lena rested her head back against the seat, exhaustion crashing over her all at once. Her body ached, her mind foggy. But they were safe now, weren't they? She barely remembered falling asleep, but when she opened her eyes again, The sky was lighter, hints of dawn creeping over the horizon. The road ahead was open and endless, stretching far beyond anything the house could reach. Mark glanced at her. "You okay?" Lena nodded slowly. "Yeah, just tired." Mark gave a weak smile. "Me too." They didn't talk about it anymore after that. There was nothing left to say. By the time they reached home, the morning sun had fully risen. The normalcy of it all felt strange. The way the birds chirped outside, the way the air smelled fresh instead of damp and rotting, felt like stepping into another world. Lena hesitated before getting out of the car. "Do you think it's really gone?" Mark didn't answer right away. He stared at the steering wheel, his fingers tapping against it. Then he sighed. "I don't know. But we burned it. We destroyed whatever was down there." He turned to look at her. "We made it out." Lena nodded, even though a part of her still wasn't sure. They went inside, locking the door behind them, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Lena allowed herself to relax. The familiar scent of home, the warm light filtering through the curtains. It was real. This was real. She curled up on the couch, exhaustion pulling at her limbs. Mark sat beside her, rubbing his face with both hands. Neither of them wanted to sleep, but eventually their bodies gave in. Hours passed in dreamless rest. When Lena woke again, the house was quiet. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Mark was still asleep, his breathing slow and even. She sat up, stretching, trying to shake off the lingering haze of exhaustion. Her eyes flickered toward the hallway, toward the mirror hanging just outside their bedroom. Her reflection stared back at her. For a second nothing seemed wrong. Then the reflection blinked. Lena hadn't. Her breath caught in her throat. The reflection smiled. Not her smile. Something else's. And then, in the faintest whisper, "You never really left."